Okay, so hello, friends of ARCC. Thank you so much for stopping by today and joining us on our third episode of ARC series. My name is April Young, and I am one of the co-founders of ARCC.
My name is Christine Lee, and I'm also a co-founder of ARCC, and we are joined by our special guest, Hiroki uh, Tanaka. Thanks for joining us, Hiroki.
No problem. Glad to be here.
So before we begin, let me introduce our series a little bit. In this series, we're joined by special guests, special Asian Canadians who we believe are amazing inspirations in our communities. In each episode, we'll be highlighting an Asian cuisine that we've delivered to our guests from local Asian restaurants. Our hope is that in these sessions, we get to engage in a fun conversation about our Asian Canadian experiences over food, because for us, there's no better way to capture our experiences and cultures and cultivate meaningful relationships than food.
Yes, and today we are excited to be joined by our special guest, Hiroki Tanaka. Hiroki Tanaka is an artist living in Toronto. In 2020, he released his debut solo album, Kaigo Kioku Kyoku.
Almost.
I mean, you know what the album is, if you can just say it.
Kaigo Kioku Kyoku.
Yeah, and it's based.
Fourth known as Kai Kikyo.
And it's based on his experience as a caregiver for his grandmother with Alzheimer's and his uncle with terminal cancer. Thanks again for joining us, and how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited. I got this delivery order just right next to me. I've got my can of Sapporo Biru as well, so I am prepped and ready to have a great conversation with you both.
Thanks so much, Hiroki. Hiroki, sorry. Would you like to share what you've got for us today?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, I just want to open this up and do a little kanpai. Cheers,
right.
Everybody.
Cheerios. I've also got a gin and tonic today.
Crap. Okay, so I actually used to work at this restaurant, Mengrai Thai. It's at like Richmond and Ontario Street. And you know, I still love their food, so I figured I would rep them. This is it doesn't look like much on a webcam, but it is. I spilled a bit. It's their number 54. It's a pineapple and lychee curry, and they serve it in a pineapple at the restaurant, and it is delicious. When I was serving there, I'd always be like, "Oh well, you got to get the 54." So that was a bestseller. So let's put this here. And then next, I was just always a real fan of their original pad thai. So I just got their pad thai with just some chicken, you know, real classic pad thai style. Not like the ketchupy kind, which is something I appreciate. I was never a fan of the ketchupy kind of stuff. I got some lemongrass coconut soup. I think it is known as tom yum or tom kha. I'm trying to remember which one. So in the restaurant, they would serve this in a coconut, and they also had like a royal lobster version of this, which was unreal. And whenever we'd have lobster in, I would always try and hustle it as much as possible, because I'd be like, this is actually the most delicious thing you'll eat at this restaurant. And the customers would always agree. And finally, some pineapple fried rice, because, you know, you got to get that fried rice. And I love it. That is what I'm eating as I try and talk without making a mess, which I already am doing.
That sounds absolutely delicious, especially that lobster soup. I love lobster, so I'm definitely going to try that. And it seems like you really like pineapple.
Well, I think they really like pineapple too. You know, they have it in all their different dishes. And I just, yeah, I mean, I think that sweet savory thing is a real classic Thai move, and they do it very well.
For sure. I'll introduce my food as well. So I ordered from Chai Pochana. It's a restaurant on St. Clair Avenue in St. Clair West. It's very close to my house. Apparently, it's one of the best Thai restaurants in the neighborhood. It's also the only Thai restaurant in the neighborhood, so people might be biased. But so I've got a tom yum soup as well, the shrimp, and I've got a chicken khao soy, khao soy, and also a shrimp and squid dish, which is their pad ped thale, and an appetizer, which is the chicken satay. So quite an interesting meal. And what about you, Christine? What have you got?
Oh, it's just kind of like a little like snack because like I didn't really feel like getting a whole meal, but this was just the one nearby my house. It's called Tyrone on Dufferin. So this is just like a mango salad with just rice, basically.
I mean,
Can't go wrong. Yeah, it's my go-to. So I love fruits.
Okay, so let's dig in and we'll start the conversation as well while we eat. So first question for Hiroki. What did your everyday life look like growing up in your community?
Well, yeah, I mean, it would be hard to call it a community. I grew up in the East York, what was formerly known as the East York area, around Cosburn and Donlands, in a house that was a funny house that was set to be demolished when my parents first immigrated from Japan to here. But we ended up living in this house for 10 years. If you see it now, it is now a condominium that is for single mothers. So nothing of the house remains. But it was, yeah, it was, I didn't really have strong ties to the Japanese community here. I did go to Japanese school for about 10 years, so every Saturday for about 3 hours. But it's not like I really hung out with any of the kids or the families outside of that school. And I would say, generally speaking, there wasn't really a lot of Japanese kids in general in Toronto, but especially in that sort of East York area. I think it was when I went to elementary, there was maybe one or two other Japanese kids. Most of the sort of demographic there was like Greek kids, and then like, you know, a handful of like Chinese kids, and then there was me. So I was kind of like a little bit of a freak and an outcast. I was pretty weird. I got bullied a lot, and yeah, I didn't have a strong community tie to any particular community for most of my life. We were oddballs for sure, you know. My mom was the white woman who is bilingual and totally fluent in Japanese, and yeah, she met my father in Japan. My dad's from Sapporo, and eventually they decided to come here because my mom's family is Canadian, and they ended up staying.
That's actually quite an interesting story because I actually never met like a Japanese like Canadian person like ever before. So this is like quite interesting for me to hear like your story.
Where are
Um,
you located?
more located like in North York area.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So next question I have for you is what does your everyday life look like nowadays?
During COVID, it's pretty boring. I work right now just for like a telemedicine company, um, and I have a adorable 18-month-old son named Jazz, and you know, I spend time with my partner Maya, and I generally, honestly, don't leave my house very much or at all. I can go for quite a long stretch, you know. So working from home, we get our groceries delivered when the pandemic was at its worst. It's pretty easy to just stay bunkered down in your own residence.
That's fair. I mean, I don't really go out like during the weekday anyways, like during the week. I only go out during the weekend. Right now because it's cold, like I can go skating, so that's like one like silver lining in all of this.
Are you
But
good?
what about like, sorry?
Are you like a really good skater?
Not really. I grew up in Toronto for 4 years. So during that time, I was lucky enough to learn skating. But it took me a whole year. The first couple of months, I couldn't get on the ice. Like I couldn't walk on the ice at all. Every time I moved, I would trip and I had to get up. And it was very, very humiliating. But I luckily kept on at it and now I can skate, but not very good. But still, like I'm relieved that I actually took lessons.
Right. Yeah. I mean, kudos, because I can still barely skate. I very rarely go skating, and that's a good sign. Maybe when the kid gets a little older, I'll go skating with him, and that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, ice hockey is like a big thing in Canada. I find like I see all the kids out there doing their ice hockey. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Do you write music as well, like these days, or in your
Um,
spare time?
Not that much. I spent the last few months learning how to program in this programming language called Max MSP, and I did a project in collaboration with a professor from York named Megan Jean Davies, and we were basically trying to bring attention to the plight of our senior citizens in elder care and the elder care facilities during the first stages of COVID. As I'm sure you might be aware that they were sort of hit the hardest during the first waves of COVID. And so the kind of conditions that they experienced, the lockdowns, the isolation, was really brutal. And um, you can check it out at COVID in the House of Old. We have a podcast as well, same name, COVID in the House of Old. And we're just really trying to bring attention to what is effectively a humanitarian crisis, and the way that we have treated the elderly in this COVID era has been less than humane. And sorry, so to finish that story, I created a audio-visual installation using this programming language, and we did an online event only a couple of weeks ago, and that was followed by a talk with a panel, and yeah, I hope that people who are watching this will tune in and become more informed about the conditions that people are experiencing in the elder care facilities, and hope that we can lobby and change policies so that we can have more humane conditions within the elder care facilities.
That sounds very cool and very, very meaningful. Thanks for sharing that with us. We'll be sure to promote that as well for you. Yeah.
So our next question is, how has your heritage as Asian Canadians impacted your life decisions and beliefs?
I'm sure there's a myriad of ways that's impacted my life and my decisions in ways that are probably also unconscious to me. Consciously, I mean, I think, it speaks to my last album that its name is Japanese, and that it really was such an investigation of my family and my desire to connect to my multicultural roots. The fact that I am a Japanese Canadian, but I'm also half Japanese, and somewhat ironically too, that like the white side of my family, the Canadian side, were families of missionaries. So they went to Japan to spread Anglican faith, and in that way they also became connected to Japanese culture. And so that kind of hybridity that I experience day to day is something that is, I think, really organic, but also expresses its way in my it comes out in my creativity. I feel in what is probably a very sort of natural, or kind of like a compulsion. Maybe it's just a sneeze. I sneeze Japanese Canadian culture, and because that is what I am. And yeah, my experience through my day to day is, it's easy to also forget. I'm going to contradict myself now, I just know it. But it's easy to forget about my heritage too, in this time of COVID, when I'm talking in English fluently, and most of the people that I interact with in my workplace and otherwise, don't necessarily have that kind of connection. They aren't, I actually don't even know if there's like another, at least fully Japanese person. I know there's another half Japanese person in my workplace, but we're a bit of a rare breed, there's not too many of us around, so at least in Toronto. So it's it's an experience of, there is a sense of isolation, and an experience of sort of having this Japanese history, but sometimes in a bit of a vacuum, feeling somewhat alienated by my identity, but also, we live in a contemporary society which is currently, at least in more left-wing communities, celebrating race and diversity, and so I feel supported on my regular day-to-day interactions, and feel comfortable to be kind of in this weird, not quite Asian, but also not Caucasian kind of space that is me. So that was a ramble. I'm sorry, guys. I'm gonna drink more of this beer.
No, it's very interesting because when we were doing research for our guests for this series as well, we tried like to find some Japanese Asian Canadians for our series as well, and it was a little bit, maybe we hadn't tried hard enough, but it was a little bit difficult to find very prominent people, and I did a sort of
Did David
race.
pick up the phone?
No.
I mean, that guy's huge.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for
They
sure.
didn't high enough. You didn't get David Suzuki. You got discount David Suzuki. So,
We'll try to get David Suzuki as well. I will say that Hiroki,
that would be a
recommend.
great. David, I would love to just have a sit down with David Suzuki, honestly.
Yeah, I really respect that guy. But yeah, so I did a racism training when I was volunteering with Planned Parenthood, and one of the things that was mentioned was that because back in, I guess, World War II, like around that time, there was the Japanese internment, and because of that, the Japanese community in Canada has sort of, like, contrary to the other sort of East Asian groups like Chinese, Koreans, they don't really gather. There's not really, a little Tokyo or little Japan, right? In Toronto, whereas you have, yeah. But nowadays,
yeah,
like, right, like if you think about like where's Little Japan in Toronto, like it's very hard to think of. Whereas if you think about where's Chinatown, where's Koreatown, or even like where's like the concentration of Filipino restaurants, like you can still kind of pinpoint some places. But whereas with the Japanese community, it's not as easy to pinpoint. And one of the reasons because of that was because of the Japanese internment.
That's right.
So that was what, yeah.
My dad is a journalist, and he is very much invested in the reparations and in the history of the Japanese internment and of Japanese Canadians in Canada. And it is really sad to see how such significant cultural hubs which existed prior to the war were completely dismantled by the government and racist policies, and how we never really recovered. You know, there used to be a large Little Tokyo in Toronto, and that is no more. I know there's one still in Vancouver, but you know, same thing. It's significantly smaller than what it used to be. And you know, speaking of my coworker who is also half Japanese, he actually told me the other day about how he doesn't have any connection to his Japanese roots really, because after the war there was this desire to amongst Japanese families to hide that Japanese identity, you know. So it's, yeah, it is a bit of a tragedy, and I think I was always a little sad about that growing up, that there wasn't more kids like me. Yeah, and I do think that, you know, decades after the war, I am also affected by that.
Yeah, that's very sad to hear as well. Because I'm from Hong Kong, and you know, I used to be not that proud of my other identity as Asian, because of colonialism. But now, like as I grow older, you know, it's very important, I think, for me to reconnect with my Asian and Hong Kong identity. And very fortunately for me in Canada, it's in Toronto, it's very easy to do that for me. So I feel very fortunate. So but I completely understand. I lived in the UK for a while as well, and it was very hard to connect with that, or even like be proud of it, because you know, you, it's not overtly racism, but people around you, they'll ask you some questions which are bordering on just being slightly like quite ignorant about the cultures. So sort of like, oh, do you eat dog meat? Like things like that. And then you're like, why are you asking me this? Right? Like, so yeah, I ramble a bit, but
No, I eat tom yum and it's delicious. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. But yeah, so connecting with that, like how, I guess like we want to know a bit more about how, you know, the Asian sort of representation in the music industry. Like, what are your thoughts about the Asian representation in the music industry? I guess maybe in Canada and even in North America.
Yeah, it's changing, I guess. You know, 10 years ago, believing that Japanese breakfast or mitsuki would be in the kind of presence that they currently have, would have been unheard of, I think. Totally wild. But it's still a predominantly white industry. You know, the world of indie rock is white first and foremost, and it would be nice to have more representation. I think I'm really proud of the work that I did in Yamataka. I was in a band, Yamataka Sonic Titan, from around 2015 to 2019, and you know, we were all people of color. Most of us were half Asian, and then we had an indigenous member and a Filipino member, and you know, I think trying to push for more visibility, especially with presenting Asian, not just passing and making like what is essentially like, you know, white music, but trying to create something that it expresses our experience of not just being, you know, white. And so it's really exciting to see more and more artists, I think, expressing their own cultural roots and resonating with the culture at large. But obviously still lots of work to do.
Yeah, actually, I can just speak on that. Like, indie rock, like for me growing up, is like one of my favorite genres. And I think it's just really hard just to like become like a certain person out of it, because like your culture, like Asian culture, is just not there, like prevalent in the media. So like for me growing up, like I like to listen to like the Arctic Monkeys, or like something that's like on Tumblr, for example, that would like replicate indie rock. And like it's just really hard to see myself as like, oh, like like people call me, oh, I'm like the white Asian, like whitewash, whatever kind of like labeled stereotype, if you know what I mean. But like
Right.
I would, yeah, exactly. So
And it's kind of like you can't win either, right? Like you're not when you're in that hybrid space, you're not Asian enough for the Asians, and you're not white enough for the white people. So you kind of just try and create your own thing, and people will probably choose a side and be like, "Wow, you weren't." It's kind of weird that you're like liking all this like white people music, or like the white people are like, "Oh, what are you doing here? Like, you're not one of us," And that's really alienating. That's an alienating experience.
but honestly, like just seeing you out there, like it just makes me like really proud that like we have like some representation, and like further on in the future to see more like Asian Canadians to dive into this whole subculture to make it our own Asian culture. So let's make, Asian cool again.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think maybe this is going to be a bit cynical, but I do feel like there's a sort of extended tokenization that's also occurring, like a real. In the same vein, I'm like, oh, this is great. We're really being able to start, music that is more ethnically diverse is becoming popular. But at the same time, the people steering the wheel and giving out the money are still white people. So, like, what is it exactly that we're winning if we're still sort of at the mercy of the white capitalists? Like, how much are we actually changing things, and is this just kind of an era of further tokenization? Even if we achieve some sort of market saturation with diverse music, is it still going to be at the beck and whim of a white audience? I don't know. But anyway, it's great. We're making music, we're changing representation. More people are seeing Asian people on stage. That is, I think, at the end of the day, what is going to slowly make a difference.
Yeah, so leading to that is like, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Um, uh, like specifically in a racial advice, or just like vague life
Like
advice?
in general, or like
In school,
how
don't do
you would,
drugs?
yeah.
Like what? Um, don't be so deterministic. I think I wasted a lot of potential saying, "Oh, I'll never do that." "Oh, I'll never need to learn French," and then I moved to Montreal for like 6 years. "Oh, I'll never need to shred on the guitar," and then I became a lead guitarist in a band and I had to shred. All these things would have been a lot less of a struggle if I had just said yes to the opportunity, or taken full advantage of the resources that were given to me. Like, I really wished that I went to an artistic high school. It was Rosedale Heights. It's like a high school near Castle Frank Station. And I think at the time I was just dealing with a lot of mental health issues. Honestly, I was just a very troubled teenager, and I should have spent a lot more time learning how to play my instruments and spending time. But I think I spent a lot of it just wasted a lot of that. And I'm happy with my life now. It's been quite a journey. I've done a lot of really cool things. But if I was to go back, I'd be like, snap out of it and try and just move forward with your life, and just take whatever opportunities are presented to you, because no matter what, they will grow and they will somehow vend together towards whatever your life goals will become, to create something that will improve your quality of life and will bring you joy. So just do it. It's like the Shia LaBeouf gif, just do it. Yeah, just do it.
Yeah, that's a very classic GIF. My friend likes to send me that whenever I'm like, oh, I don't know what to do, and she'll send me it. Um, but that's very interesting because when I think back to my like childhood or like my teenage years, I often think that I've been wasting a lot of time as well. So I don't know if it's like a general thing that everyone kind of when they look back on their childhood or teenage years, they think, oh,
What
I think I've just wasted a lot of time.
what was your experience? I mean, you have a really interesting story because you were raised in Hong Kong, right?
Partly, yeah. So I lived in Hong Kong till I was 6, and then from 6 I moved to Canada to Toronto until I was 10, and then my mom and I immigrated here. So after we got our citizenship, something happened and we had to move back to Hong Kong, and so I completed my high school back in Hong Kong, and then I was like, well, I want to go somewhere else again. So I ended up getting a scholarship to go to the UK. So that's where I spent my bachelor degree. And then I went back to Hong Kong again, did a year's work, and I was like, well, I want to leave again. So I came back to Toronto because I was like, I'm Canadian and I want to see, what it's like in Canada, see if I can make a life here again.
Amazing.
Yeah, so yeah, I've done quite a lot, but at the same time, it's like I guess it's also like you're trying to compare yourself with other people, right? And when you compare yourself with people who've achieved a lot um, at a young age, you're like, well, if I had done more in my high school, then maybe I would have achieved as much.
Yeah, yeah, I feel that. I feel that for sure. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but some things that strike me about your story is that one is that you were moving around a lot. So like I would love to read a study, and of course I have my own hypothesis about movement and being part of the diaspora is like uh, uh, a challenge for educational systems. It's hard for you to be able to work on yourself and focus when your actual physical environment is unstable and it's changing all the time. And I think that's a real true thing that as like Asian Canadians we can talk about, which is that a lot of us are landed immigrants or first generation immigrants, and we don't have the resources of of a family that has been here for several generations, and we're not able to navigate the world in the same way with the same kind of knowledge and experience, and that really affects our abilities to achieve all the things that you want to be able to achieve in your life, your desires and dreams and goals and whatnot. And I think that's like a really salient point actually, is the frustration of looking back at our childhood and being like, oh well, if this and this and this had happened, but it's like it wasn't in our control. Like it was actually like just by virtue of being stuck in a foreign system and forced to mold into that shape, it creates a significant obstacle towards our ability to just exist and to thrive.
Yeah, I totally understand that. Well, because that's kind of like my experiences as well. When I went back to Hong Kong, because in Hong Kong you had to do English, Chinese, and math. Like these are the three um, necessary subjects. And my Chinese was horrible because I went to Chinese school when I was in Toronto, but it's not that great, right? And you're expected over in Hong Kong to be able to write and to speak, give a presentation, and get good grades as well. And it was just very hard. And I lost interest in the language because it was just so hard, which I regret now because it's actually a very interesting language. The older I get, the more, I try to reconnect with my roots. And yeah, moving around, it does a thing to how you view your identity. Um, when I came to Toronto, and I became a citizen, I felt really strongly, and I was very young, right? So I felt very strongly that I'm Canadian. So even when I went back to Hong Kong, I would tell people I'm Canadian. And then I did my high school, so I spent like 10 years in Hong Kong again. And then at that time, I was like, oh, I'm more Hong Konger than Canadian, because I've kind of lost touch with being in Canada. And then I came back to Canada, and even though I have the passport and everything, I'm still, half of me is still like, oh, I don't know if I'm Canadian enough. So that really, like, I think that's very interesting as an immigrant and as a moving immigrant.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But yeah, so let's move on from that. Another question we have is, what motivates you to get through the day, even if you're having a bad day?
Yeah, that's cute. What motivates me? I mean, I feel good about my life now. I'm really in a happy place. I have a kid and a loving partner, and in spite of COVID, we are doing quite well. I'm quite blessed and privileged, and am thankful for uh, what I've been able to achieve in the last few years. So, you know, uh, I can say that things when I was younger were quite hard, and I was very unhappy, and it was hard to get through the day. But these days, I am having a much easier time looking forward to each day. So I am genuinely thankful for that.
I'm very glad to hear that, and congratulations on the baby.
Thank you. Yeah, he's a joy every day.
Oh, do you have any I guess not ties, but like, or
Oh my god.
knowledge, or in like Japanese sort of
See how
religion?
terrible I like ate that pad thai? That was like a total mess. I love anyone who watches this is just gonna watch like bits of noodle just flying out of the webcam. I'm sorry. Sorry. Continue your question. The dangers of eating and interviewing. This is disastrous.
Wait, that's kind of like the joy of it, right?
I'm being much more careful about what. You know what, Christine? You had the right idea. You just stuck to the mango salad, just like little bites of things that you're sneaking in throughout the conversation. Meanwhile, I'm like trying to like glug 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 my soup and my beer and my chicken pad thai. Mess. It's a mess.
I mean, that's kind of the joy of mukbangs, right? Like people like watch mukbangs just to see like the food because it looks so delicious.
But they're so good at it. They're so elegant at eat things, so it never like splatters everywhere. You know what I mean? There's an art to it. It's like ikebana or like a tea ceremony or something. They just like know how to not do it. Me, on the other hand, I can't not make a mess.
Well, at least it's like something fun to watch, right?
I hope so.
Sure. Mukbang, like people who make a mess, and that's their kind of specialty.
Oh, is
You've
that
got to
a
like
thing? Is that
be
like a
a
subgenre?
baby. Messy mukbang, right? It even like alliterates.
Oh, okay. No, are you proposing it, or is this like an actual element of mukbang? I just want to know.
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay. You're just okay. I agree. I think a messy mukbang would be very real. I'm sure like all the mukbang aficionados are like, but one day, they're gonna look for that like perfect mukbang that's like slightly messy and it's just perfection. The height of mukbang.
I mean, this was gonna be like one of those clickbaits where everyone's gonna be like, "Ooh, what's that?" See your video, check out your music, right?
They have like they'll have like a placemat at the end. I should have put a placemat under here so you can just see all like the curry splatter, and it's almost like a before and after moment. Sorry, what was your question again?
Oh, my question is like, do you have any upcoming like future projects?
Oh, honestly, no. Like I just released the COVID in the House of Gold project. So please check that out. Again, we've got some stuff up on YouTube, on the Spotify's, and the internets. Megan, the professor who I collaborated with is incredibly knowledgeable and beyond articulate about the subject matter. She's essentially, she calls herself a historian of aging, and it's just a pleasure to hear her talk about these things, and it's very moving and it's very sad. Especially so, to go into a little of her side of the exhibit, she went around interviewing survivors of the elder care facilities during COVID. So that included like also the workers, and family members of deceased relatives who died in the elder care during the first few waves of COVID, and created these exhibits using these chairs. So she would take memorabilia items that were meaningful to those people, and she put them on these chairs, and she also had interviews with those people alongside these chairs. And so the idea was that you would walk through a space and you would see the objects, and you would hear the story that the person was telling about the person who passed away. And they're just so powerful and heartbreaking, and they describe that real experience of sort of being deprived of a good death. And I think that was a really good term that I came away with during the panel, was that these people were within the elder care system were deprived of a good death. And my project was essentially to take the numbers from elder care facilities in Ontario and BC and represent those visually and audio, orally, thank you, by creating these sort of dots that would move. So it's, I would call it data visualization was what the art form that I was kind of working with. And the idea was that as the dots would move, they were accompanied by a musical note. And you would be able to see the sheer sort of numbers of the people who we lost during those waves of COVID in Ontario and BC at least. And you can imagine, extrapolate it to, worldwide, really. Yeah, and it's a really meaningful project. So I'm really proud to be able to talk about it. I don't know what's on the horizon for me, honestly. In some ways, before I started on this project, I wasn't even sure if I was going to keep making music. But I think if there's anything that I've sort of come to terms with in the last few months, is that I just like creating. So I don't know, maybe I'll make something, but I'm really not pushing to do anything right now. I mean, there's no shows, the whole industry of music is at a standstill. It's a complete disaster. And even when things really do start reopening again, I can only imagine that it will be significantly harder and harder to get good gigs and to support artists and to make a living off of art in the music industry. And so I'm fairly cynical about the prospects of continuing as a professional artist, and I'm happy to keep creating, because apparently that's what helps me get through my day. But whether I'll try and make a sort of commercial life out of it is yet to be decided.
It's fair enough. But I mean, yeah, like right now, like with COVID, like I think all the artistic industries are definitely being affected. And then that's a real shame, because well, I heard your album, and I think it's very beautiful. I love your sound. So I think it would be a great shame if you didn't make any more. But that's my 2 cents. Of course, like you should consider your own mental health and your situation. But my 2 cents is that if you have the time and the energy, you should go and make another album.
Well, I really hope this whole thing with Neil Young and Joni Mitchell just like brings Spotify down, because I think having that kind of unlimited access to music is one of the worst things. Like, I appreciate that people feel entitled to be able to listen to music, and that music should be free, and that it should be removed from a capitalist system. But at the same time, what has happened is actually far worse and more dysfunctional than any sort of socialist attempt at creating music to free music from the clutches of capitalism has ever been able to achieve. And ultimately what's occurred is that the artists are even more disenfranchised, and the labels and the industry is just becoming even more parasitic, and no promising artists are getting nurtured. Only the safest bets are being driven forward, and I think it's just a huge bleak infrastructure has been replaced music, the previous music industry. And I mean, some people say, well, but you can just tour. But I mean, I did around 200 up to even maybe 300 dates between 2018 and 2019 in Yamataka, and that is a grueling touring schedule. That is a punishing thing for anyone. It is incredibly unhealthy, and it's honestly, your life expectancy goes down dramatically as a touring artist. Statistically, these are facts. It's not a sustainable thing for anyone, and if we want to look forward and try and create something more sustainable, we have to change the way the industry works. I've seen, like, I kind of get my partner's in film, so I kind of see what that industry's like. One of the biggest things, obviously, is that there's just tons of money in film right now. It's a huge machine, and there's unions that actually do protect the interests of their union members up to a degree, and that is sorely lacking in the music industry. Like, I don't feel like we're really being able to make a living wage, and no one really cares. No one really cares that musicians are like, okay, fine, we'll just find someone else who will do it for free, and they will find someone, and that is terrible and exploitive and unfortunate.
That's pretty grim to hear, honestly.
Sorry.
And like, no, like it's very eye-opening.
I'm just gonna start ranting. I mean, that's what happens.
No, go for it. I mean, it's very interesting for us because I don't think well, one of our co-founders used to be a singer, I think. She has ties with the music industry as well. But for me, I have no idea about the arts industry. So it's very interesting to hear about your thoughts, especially about Spotify, and how the music industry and the sort of the entertainment industry has kind of gone into. So we have about 15 minutes left. Let's go back to the food. I know you worked at the restaurant before, but how do you find the food?
That's great. It's nice and nostalgic too, man. I miss these flavors. Yeah, tom yum is great. I should have more of that pineapple rice, actually. But I've just been chowing down on the pineapple number 54 pineapple lychee curry, and the pad thai here, and it is doing me just great. Thank you so much, ARCC, for helping to feed me and my family another night. I will share this with my partner after this, and we will and I won't have to worry about making lunch tomorrow. Thank you.
Good to hear. That's good to hear. Is Thai like one of your favorite cuisines, or?
Is that? I mean, it's up there. I really love food. I mean, it's hard for me to put them on like a 1 to 10. The vegans will hate me, but my favorite, it's still like barbecued meat. I love it. I really try and reduce my meat consumption. But if I'm going out and getting takeout or something like that, I will be the first in line for like a Korean barbecue or something like that, or like a steakhouse. It's a guilty pleasure for sure. And then In terms of like home cooked meals, like most of the time I'm making like honestly, it's really easy to make like spaghetti sauces and stuff, so I'm finding like most of the time I'm just surviving off of like chilies, like tomato based stews, all that stuff. um so yeah, I don't know, I love Thai food. I love a lot of I love Indian food. I don't know where I'm going with this, but food is delicious.
Japanese?
Oh, hell yeah, of course. And you know what I will say? You know what makes me sad about where I'm currently located at Victoria Park, Kingston Road, is that there is just like no izakaya game, and the sushi is super generic and bland, and it's just super. There's no ramen over here. Like I would kill for just like even like a Kinton ramen, like I just want something that's like good. I have this dream that I'll just like open an izakaya over here because I'm like I would love some chicken skewers, like bring me a zakushi. But yeah, I mean sushi is amazing. I have had some very good sushi in my life, and I love it. And I also love like more of like the home cooked meals. My mother still does oshogatsu, which is the traditional New Year's feast. Um, it's sort of it's like the real, the stuff you can't get at like a sushi store, like kimpira gobo, which is like stir fried bamboo shoot, and oden, which is like this kind of big like stew with like eggs and those like fish tubes. I don't even know what they're called anymore. I just eat it, like as I was raised with this, so I don't even think about like the names or whatever. I'm like, oh yeah, that thing again. I love that thing. Give me more of that thing. And yeah, the stuff that you can't find in restaurants. So I hope one day, this area will become a little bit more lively food wise, because it is kind of a desert, a food desert.
Yikes. Yeah, I didn't know that the like Japanese restaurant scene was that bad in your area, which
Sad.
is, yeah, for sure. And
Poultry.
yeah, like you should totally open a restaurant as well, like, bring your family cuisine into it. That would be so cool, like a family Japanese.
From one dying industry to another, I'll just go from music to restaurants. What could go wrong?
Back, you'll come back. We're stay positive. But yeah, my food is absolutely great as well. Like I said, best Thai restaurant in my neighborhood.
What is it
Um,
called?
so Chai Pochana.
Chai Pajano.
So yeah, Chai Pochana. So if you have the chance, if you're around St. Clair West, check it out. It's pretty cool. How about you, Christine? How's your food?
Oh, I'm full. Like it's all good. Like I tend to eat like lighter meals like during dinner, so I don't like to fill myself up like a lot. So
I
it's
didn't
it's all
even see
good.
you eating.
It was it's just a bowl. Like it's not a lot.
Just like
I don't
you just go like while no one's looking, you're like.
yeah.
That was you? Because I would look at you and be like, is Christine actually eating? And I couldn't see it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't tend to eat a lot, so it's just me personally.
That's fair. Okay. Um, that's great. What was the restaurant that you went to again?
It's called Thai Room. It's on Dufferin.
Yes,
So,
I know. Yeah, we used to
yeah.
live at Lansdowne and Bloor, and I passed by Thai
I'm like a major foodie, so like whenever you know any good like Japanese spots, like please let me know, because like I'm really down to try like authentic like Japanese food. So
You eat meat?
yeah, I actually do. Yeah, and seafood.
Zakushi is definitely the one on Carlton and Parliament. I went there, and they have like the proper. I don't know what it is, but it's like they use a special wood to heat their grill, and that imparts such an excellent flavor on the meat. Like you just can't get it like that, in other places. And so I would recommend going there if you want like that kind of traditional izakaya meat skewer experience. My only beef with all the izakayas in Toronto is that they're all loud. Like they all have this like club vibe, and that's not my experience. When you go to an izakaya at like like down the street from your buddy's house in Tokyo, It's just like it's like a couple of dudes, and there's like a bunch of like paper with the various dishes like handwritten on them, and it's just like one silent guy just like working the grill, with his little fan, and it's so good, and it's small and it's chill, like it's like a quiet pub. And that's actually the experience that I want with my izakayas. These loud, like, and everyone's like, yeah, shy, not shy. I'm like, oh my God, everyone calm down. Like, can I just eat my meat in peace? You know what I mean? And
Yeah, I mean,
if
I
you
mean,
ever go to Japan, you'll understand.
sometimes it's great though, because like I love going to Kinka. Like and they do
Oh,
that sake bomb.
yeah, it's so loud though. Isn't it loud?
It's, but it's so fun.
I guess so. You're right. You know what? It is fun. It is fun. It's hard to have a conversation, but I guess it's fun.
Exactly. But yeah, I was quite surprised the first time I went in as well, because I was like, whoa, it's so loud. And if I've been to Japan as well, and a lot of restaurants, and it's kind of like I guess maybe a stereotype, but like it's like Japanese people don't like very loud, or to be very loud, right? Like that's kind of one of the
That's the
stereotypes.
stereotype, right? They don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was quite surprised when I came over here, and I was like, oh, that's very loud. But it was very fun. So I was like, okay, it is what it is.
It's like some sort of weird compensatory compulsion on like the Japanese restaurateurs side, is that they think like, oh, Canadians are crazy loud, so we just got to be like super loud, and just like totally make it, this is Canadian izakaya, it's like everyone's really loud all the time, and it's like, no.
So, I guess one last question I have before you like wrap up, but like, are there meals that you like, your mom has made for you, but then you kind of carried on to like for like your wife or your kids? Like,
That's a good question. I actually have only started this conversation with my mother recently, which is to say that we kind of had to sit down. It's just me and my sister, and we were like, well, if we don't take on this role, then who will? So I think we sort of decided. We all came to a conclusion that like the next few oshogatsu should be a little more educational, and we should be trying to learn how to actually make the dishes as well, because I would not know how to make these dishes today. No idea. They're very labor intensive. I will say that like Japanese traditional food is super labor intensive, and you're always making like 5 dishes at once, which is really intense. For me, I love throwing everything into a crock pot, or my Instapot, and like 30 seconds later, boom, stew. That's how I like to cook. So having to temper my frustration at juggling all these multiple things that are all very time sensitive is going to be a little bit a learning curve, but I feel it's important.
Sure. It's also part of the culture, right? Like being connected with the identity. And I think food really it helps to pass on certain cultural aspects of your other identity. But yeah, like I guess our time's a bit up now, and thanks again, Hiroki, for joining us. I'm glad you enjoyed the meal. I think we had a wonderful conversation. We touched on a lot of topics, and yeah, I wish you all the best. We wish you all the best in your future endeavors, and hopefully we'll have another chance to do another collaboration. Yeah. And as for the rest of us,
Yeah.
as for the rest of everyone, we stay tuned for our future episodes, and also follow us on our socials. Thank you. Have a good night.